If you're old enough to start a business, you're old enough to like fucking start a business.
Yeah. Teddy, awesome to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Bell Curve. And as I'm sure you know, for the benefit of our listeners, here we're all about equipping young professionals and aspiring entrepreneurs with the knowledge and tools to really launch their own ideas, which you have done firsthand. So really excited for this conversation. And for our listeners, we're lucky to have Teddy Fitzgibbons with us, who's the co-founder and CEO of StreetFair. And you have a really unique background that I'm excited to dig into here, from working for a VC venture capital powerhouse to launching and scaling a startup and then even launching your own. So really excited to dig into that. And Jake tells me you're both Charlotte based. So in that vicinity, I always know it because obviously it's a fun place to visit. And it's great when I'm freezing my butt off here in Chicago 6 months a year. But I hear that really like you're a big part of putting the Charlotte kind of tech scene on the map here, which is, will be exciting to dig into as well.
Working on it,
Are you from Charlotte originally? Or
no, actually not. I'm from Kansas City originally. So fairly new to Charlotte, but been a great spot and met a lot of cool people in the tech scene and outside of it.
Is the next question that you always get, are you from the Kansas or Missouri side?
From those who know, it's not a bad question. My answer is always the same though, which is, I grew up on the Kansas side. If you've spent any time in Kansas City, you know that like the side is like something that's on a map, but in real life, there's like a 2-lane road, one on each side called State Line. And like beyond that, you'd have no idea whether you're in Kansas or Missouri. So it's very much one city. There's a road called State Line, that goes right through the middle. And technically they have different governments and whatever, but like practically, one city.
Interesting. So as someone who's never been, it's really characterized to me as like, it's really two polar opposite sides, but no.
If you're trying to get snow removed, for the 3 days a year as it snows, like Kansas is all over it. Missouri's going to let those roads ice. That's about the noticeable difference. Obviously there's stuff like with the local government administration and school systems, those are distinct, but like living in Kansas City, the school I went to was on State Line. So I actually parked in Kansas and my classes were in Missouri, like 10 feet away. And so it's really, it feels pretty natural.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. Already learning a lot here on 2 minutes into our podcast.
Yeah, I mean, this is a geography based, podcast, I assume.
Which will be to the benefit of any middle schoolers listening to this.
Exactly, that's where we started. Yeah.
But you've made a lot of enviable jumps here, Teddy, like breaking into the analytics space, breaking into VC, then like launching startups. So excited to break that down, hear how you navigated it all and what you learned along the way.
That's it.
And Teddy, it's great to have you, man. To just formally kind of give listeners an idea of your timeline here. So you went to Middlebury, where there you were majoring in econ, and then you started your career in data analytics before moving into the big leagues venture capital at Bain. So from there, you were at Passport. So you were, from what I can understand, the VP of International Business Development, actually working in London for Passport there. You did that for 2 years, and then you were the VP of Product at Passport for another 2 years before you finally jumped off and started StreetFair. Now based here in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's awesome to have you with us, man. How do you get from London basically now to Charlotte? Is that where you moved to, London directly to Charlotte? Or did you have somewhere directly in the middle there?
No, it was from London to Charlotte, and it was all through Passport. Passport's a Charlotte-based company, and I was living in New York. Joined Passport from Bain Capital Ventures, who's one of the lead investors in Passport. And I actually joined Passport to start the London office. So went to London for a year. And then when I jumped into the VP of product role, this was, pre-COVID. And so the whole team was in the office in Charlotte, and it was very hard to do that remotely. The irony is I moved because of work on March 11th, 2020. And I think March 13th, 2020 is when like everyone went remote again. So March 12th was like my only day in 3.5 years of Passport. Like that was in person. But that's life. Charlotte was a much better place for COVID. I'm very glad I didn't get stuck in London.
Yeah,
That's nice.
love that. And so I'm really curious. I know we were talking a little bit earlier, Teddy, about like StreetFair. So I just started kind of managing my own building and at least property with a tenant. And I encountered this week even kind of a major repair that I needed to find someone for. And so it sounds like there's I can speak to it firsthand. There's a major need for people to have what StreetFair does. So how did you and your co-founder kind of take this idea and make it into a reality of launching about a year ago?
Yeah. We got started on it about a year ago. We started launching pilot neighborhoods in March. Basically at its core, StreetFair is a marketplace for home services, and particularly home service maintenance, like gutter cleaning, pressure washing, lawn care, air duct cleaning, a lot of home maintenance services I didn't know existed before starting StreetFair. The difference with StreetFair, it's all predicated at the neighborhood level. So we make it really easy for homeowners to see which local businesses their neighbors already use and trust. And then arguably more interesting is which businesses already have scheduled visits in your neighborhood. Like one of your neighbors has hired a tree trimmer next Thursday, and we let homeowners piggyback on each other's existing bookings. So we live in the same neighborhood. You have a tree trimmer coming next Thursday. I can see that in StreetFair. I can add myself to that service visit, and then you and I both get a discount because now that tree trimmer is making one trip to the neighborhood and getting 2 customers. So we really, designed the model to kind of benefit all participants, including some pretty cool positive externalities like a lower carbon footprint, less traffic and some other things. But, to answer your question, as far as how we got going, and I think one of the reasons that we're taking a very new approach to this problem, we're obviously not the first company who's thought, hey, it's a pretty big pain in the ass to, book a tree trimmer. Like, let's go build something that's a little bit better. But interestingly enough, it actually got started, Mike, my co-founder, when COVID hit, and he was the VP of engineering at Passport. So we had worked together for a little bit, been through the trenches together. We knew we wanted to, start a business together and go into business together. And so, a couple months after COVID hit, we actually almost bought a pool cleaning business in Charlotte. Zero tech thesis. Like he was an engineer, I was a product person. It was like, no, this is just pool cleaning. But the basic idea or the kind of thesis, we had heard that when COVID happened, there was like a 2-year wait list to get a pool built in Charlotte because all the neighborhood pools were closed, the country club pools were closed, whatever else. So like everybody was trying to get a pool, put in their house. And we were like, well, it's kind of interesting. There's going to be way more pools built in the next couple of years than there normally would be. And unlike Zoom or something that could contract after COVID, it's not like, it's like, hey, COVID's over. Let's pour concrete in the pool we built last year. So we're like, well, this is like a growing market and it might be sustained. This could be like a cool, side investment.
Wild.
And as we like started doing diligence, we realized like, wow, if you want to own a good pool business, you got to have 10 pools on the same street. You got to have what's called route density. You want to go to one street and clean 10 pools as opposed to driving all over Charlotte. And there was like nothing even remotely modern out there to help local businesses drive route density. It was like going door to door or like leaving notes in people's mailbox saying, your neighbors use me and whatever else. And so I think that was the problem that kind of caught our interest is like, massive market and huge underserved opportunity to help drive route density. And then as we dug deeper into it, we realized like the neighborhood trust problem was equally strong. So we ended with the 2-sided marketplace there.
Wow. And is this something where obviously there's a consumer pain point, like homeowner?
Yeah, totally.
Right? You even brought out, businesses struggle with their unit economics here to like really effectively deploy, not just get customers and get revenue, but like really have sharp margins. So are you taking like one route or the other? Like when you have these 2-sided marketplaces, oftentimes like Uber, right? They're like subsidizing drivers while like giving all these like free rides away. Are you like take? What kind of approach do you even take to launch this from scratch?
Yeah. Launching a two-sided marketplace is definitely it's definitely really hard. And it's not for the faint of heart. I think the upside is anything that has network effects like a marketplace is like, if successful, and that's a high bar. Most days I wake up and I'm like, couldn't we have just picked like a SaaS business where you can just incrementally add customers? Like, why do we have to do this whole hard thing? But once you get it going, it's a really powerful force. So we're going to, but yeah, I mean, in terms of our approach, I think one of the things you have to be good at, and it's different for a lot of businesses, but particularly for any two-sided marketplace with like a local component, like an Uber or Instacart or any of the food delivery apps, is you got to be really, really good at breaking a big problem down. Like every time you think about what StreetFair could be in 10 years, like your kind of mind recoils because you're like, oh, how am I going to light up 100,000 neighborhoods and get, thousands and thousands of service providers? And I think one of the things we've done really well is say like, okay, none of that matters. Can we get 30 service providers and 50 homes in one neighborhood to use this? Like, and if we can break this down to one neighborhood, we could probably do it in two neighborhoods. Like, I mean, like, okay, cool. We got to work in 2 times. Like, how much harder would it be to get it to work 10 times? And then you just increment your way to like, cool, now we're in 15 markets and all this stuff, which we're definitely not, to be clear. But, I think you've got to be really good in a two-sided marketplace at like breaking problems down.
I love that.
Interesting. And so I was doing some, you're pretty sharp, man. That's pretty interesting the way they just kind of like broke that down. I think a lot of young entrepreneurs, they get too bogged down with what you just said, right? Yeah. They think 10 years from now of what their business could be, or what, when you come up with the idea, you don't come up with the idea of starting with one neighborhood. You're like, oh, we could own, all the major cities, and this could be this big.
I was shopping for yachts when I had this idea. I was like, all right, like, am I going 300 feet or should I just go?
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, and they're modeling out in Excel. Like, I've been there, right? Because you got to pitch that based. So when you raise VC, like you got to show them, hey, this is what this looks like in 5 years. This is what this looks like in 10 years. Because you're basically raising money on how big your total addressable market is, and how big the company could be and how quickly. And so I was doing some research on Crunchbase. I don't know if this is verified or not. You don't have to say, but it looks like you guys were able to raise $1.7 million in your seed round earlier this year. That's a pretty big seed round, from what I understand. I've been in your shoes and see that that's a grind. Kind of looks like you did it right as the market was taking a turn. How was that experience for you guys?
It was, we were very fortunate to have a lot of interest, and it was a very quick, it was a very quick raise. It's probably fairly called a seed, at the time. It was definitely a pre-seed because that's how crazy things were, which was a term that was new to me, even though I had only a couple of years out of venture. But, I think, yes, we definitely raised in a better market. I had a couple, advantages going out to raise a business than maybe your average person, which I certainly want to be like cards on the table about, which is like, I had been a venture capitalist. And the most valuable thing there is like, I knew how it worked and I had a network. And so, I started just by hitting up my old BCV colleagues, really none of whom did consumer, because Bain was a big kind of B2B VC firm. But, it started as like, hey, let me bounce this idea off you. And I think the combination of the idea, how we were approaching it, it very quickly turned into, hey, you should run at this. And I don't do consumer, but let me introduce you to this person who's a consumer VC. And so it moved really quickly. And we certainly don't take that for granted, but I think it was a function of like the time and how thoughtful we were. The one thing I would definitely say we did well is we were moonlighting on StreetFair for a while before we went to raise. And I think that's like some of the best advice I'd ever give. Like, we didn't, have some big scaled operation, but like, my co-founder was an engineer, so we were building lightweight versions of it. We were running tests in our respective neighborhoods, and it we ended up having, pretty clear and organized approach and validation by the time we went to raise the pre-seed.
Oh, Teddy, what does that look like for, you said your own neighborhoods? Are you just like knocking on like
we definitely
door?
did a little of that. No, it was much more like so again the idea for StreetFair has evolved a lot since when we first met in March of 21 and like took the day off work and like had an awesome whiteboarding session. Like that idea has evolved, but by the time we went to raise, like we understood, we had learned a lot just by running some tests, which is again an advantage of consumer. Like you couldn't do that if you want to start an enterprise payments company. It's like you can't really run a lot of tests. But what we would do is we would just like hire someone like, hey, I need my gutters cleaned. So we would like hire a gutter cleaner, and then we'd say, hey, by the way, like if I get 2 or 3 of my neighbors to like also sign up, like, would you give us a discount? And we'd wait until one of them was like, sure, like, what were you thinking? And we'd be like, how about like $10 each? Like if we didn't really care, it was just about the validation that like service providers understood the return to route density and they would pass that economics on to consumer. And then, we would just like try to find a service provider who would say yes to this concept. We hadn't built anything, which is also advice I'd give. Like when you're looking to start something, a lot of people or a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly more junior entrepreneurs or first-time entrepreneurs, they're like, all right, this starts with $300,000 in dev. Like I need to go hire a dev shop to like build my prototype app, and then I'll see if anyone wants this. Yeah. And I think one of the things, and largely I credit this to my co-founder, Mike, but he's a master and I've become very good at like taking the shortest path to learning what you set out to learn, or the cheapest path. Like you usually don't need to build an app to find out if you're solving the problem people care about. Yep. And so, our first 5 or 6 group deals were totally offline, but we were like, hey, I mean, if we just saved me and 3 neighbors, $30 on gutter cleaning, like via text, like we could probably build a basic web page that captured there were 3 users on it and like that we all would save $10. And then we could take that basic web page and like share it on Nextdoor, the neighborhood Facebook group. And then we got like 3 other strangers to sign up. And we were like, all right, that was a very cheap experiment where we were able to validate the core concept.
Wow. So I know Jake's been in your shoes exactly, right? Literally just seeing, is there consumer interest? Like, is there any market here, especially since it hasn't been digitized? My experience really is more so on the end of scaling companies rather than like creating something brand new from scratch. So it's fascinating to hear this. And is this something that you acquired and picked up through your time in venture, or has this been a mindset like dating back to, if we talk to high school Teddy, captain of I'm sure you're captain of your high school tennis team too. So like, and we talked to high school Teddy, did you have the same mindset back then?
Definitely not. I was just as ambitious, and I would have been just as like excited to try something totally new. StreetFair definitely was not the first business I started. It was the first like for-profit venture-backed, like I'm going to take a real swing and bet my career on this. But I'd started 3 or 4 businesses, over the years, like small, totally different, including a nonprofit. But high school Teddy would have had the same like I knew I wanted to start a company. I would say like the ability to kind of break a problem down and iterate and be really thoughtful was, my time at venture definitely taught me some frameworks, and like the 8-person New York office at BCV when I was there, like some of the smartest people I've ever sat in a room with. And so even though nothing we were working on had anything to do with like some of the problems I'm solving now, I just think I like leveled up my thinking a little bit and like frameworks and how to approach problems. That said, I think VCs are very much like the big picture, like, will this work at scale? And this is the opposite. I'm like, can I get 3 other neighbors to like agree to this thing? But I think it gave me some tools. And then, a lot of it is like I said, Mike's really good at this, and Mike's been a career engineer. And so this is kind of a thing that like, I think certain engineers who really figure this out become so powerful, because it's not about lines of code. It's about like, well, is this the right thing? Like, how can we validate that before I go, put my headphones on and crank it out? So Mike was really good. I'd highly recommend the book. the Lean Startup. Mike made me read it, and it informed a lot of how we approached. And that's where I kind of got the like, what's the shortest path to like learning? And that's your really only goal when you're setting out to do something.
Teddy, what kind of student were you in college? So you were an econ major. Were you kind of entrepreneurial back then? Is this kind of something you knew you wanted to do?
Yeah, definitely. I was a good student. I probably wish I had a more rebellious streak. Like you hear about the best entrepreneurs are like, oh, school sucks, or they had decent grades. Like I was pretty, I was a pretty good student. And like, I cared a lot about school. I started my first business at Middlebury, which was a really cool, just like thing to do. And it's the advice I give to everyone. I'm like, I don't care how old you are, like start something. It can be literally a lemonade stand. It can be whatever. It actually probably shouldn't be some huge venture back thing, or it certainly doesn't need to be, but you just learn so many valuable things. So the first business I started actually broke my leg like really bad, had to have basically reconstructive ankle surgery when I was a freshman. And Middlebury is all like buffet style dining halls. And so if you're on crutches for 3.5 months, like I was, like you really can't like hold a tray and put food and whatever else. And this probably also tells you a little bit about like my ability to care more about a project than my own like personal appearance. Like I don't know if this was great for my social life in Middlebury, but I designed this like tray that had like duct tape. I like stole a dining hall tray, drilled holes in it, like put this like strap balancing thing that I had designed through it, and like wore it around the dining halls so I could like serve myself on crutches. It was definitely not very cool looking, but it worked really well. And I ended up having like people come up to me and say, oh, where'd you get that? Like I was just on crutches, or my friend's on crutches. And I was like, this is clearly homemade, but I was like, hey, like a handful of people just said they wanted this thing I built. Because when I built it, I was like, for what it's worth, like I lost, 17 pounds in like 3 weeks when I went back to Middlebury, and I was like, all right, I got to figure something out. And so I literally built it because I was like, this is brutal. And I was tired of, as a freshman, only been there for a few months, like asking people to get my plate of food. But then when I had people kind of coming up to me and asking me where I got this, I was like, maybe this is a thing. The head of dining hall services was fortunate enough to like take my meeting when I showed up at his office. And he thought it was really cool. He gave me the phone book of every dining hall manager of every college and university, and was like, don't tell anyone. Sorry, Matt. Don't tell anyone I gave you this, but like, you should totally call them all and sell this. And I was like, done. I was like, I'm going to do this. And then I won the business pitch competition. I think I got $3,000 from that, and partnered up with one of my classmates. And we spent the summer like, figuring this out and selling it to schools. And from then on, I was like, all right, I'm doing this. Like, this is awesome.
And that was you have it on your LinkedIn, Easy Tray LLC.
That was Easy Trays.
Yeah, Easy Trays LLC. What happened to that business? Is it just like most people think like, oh, there's always like this huge crash and burn, or something happens like when a business kind of goes away, but usually just kind of fizzles out, or it's like, all right, we're not working on this anymore, and like you just gotta let the LLC like ride.
It was basically that. I mean, when we set out to build Easy Trays, like neither one of us thought like this is what gets us to like, we're not going to retire off our Easy Trays money. It's like, we kind of knew it was a stupid, crazy little idea, but having lived through what it was like to, be on crutches, or I didn't have a disability, but people with a disability on campus are in a similar problem. I was pretty passionate about like this isn't that hard to build, and no one else was helping in this way. But we knew it was going to be like just this cool thing we could do. And so, I think we viewed it as like a summer project a little bit. And we really spent, I guess the first summer I spent like testing different materials. And then the next summer we like actually were selling this and stuff. And so, at the end of that summer, like I did a semester abroad, and I wasn't trying to like run this dining hall business from Madrid, Spain. And so we just kind of let it go. What I will say, like a lesson learned, and I'm fortunate enough that my business partner's parents had a little more wherewithal, but like, we we had created this LLC, we had done all this, like we made like $10,000, we had like tax exposure, like we were supposed to file this, and we just like went back to school. We were like, yeah, that was fun. Like, and so it was like my buddy's dad was like, you guys are clowns. Like, I had our lawyer like collapse the LLC and like file tag, and I was like, thank you for that. Like months later he told me, but it was a really fun summer.
And I love that you make some companies with cool names: Easy Tray, StreetFair. Like, is this just like
Party Start is a nonprofit?
Yeah, exactly. So are these all just Teddy off the top of your head, kind of like things that you come up with?
Yeah. I think you're being generous and saying Easy Trays is cool, but
Hey, you're 19, right? I mean,
yeah. I think Hardy Start and StreetFair are great. We get some StreetFair name compliments. Yeah, I mean, both these just actually all of these were like the first name. So they just, yeah, they worked.
Wow.
I guess. Yeah.
You
You got to start with the name. Yeah.
Totally. Did the domains exist? Were they available?
I'd say really that's where you start, is like you kind of think of it, and then I just go to GoDaddy and I'd like plug in and see what I could get. Hardy Start was available, Easy Trays was available, and that informed the name selection. StreetFair was not available, so I actually had to buy that domain from someone who had been squatting on it since like 1996 and had like 10,000 domains as a whole thing. So we started with Join, like we knew we wanted to name it StreetFair. So, joinstreetfair.com was available. And then once we raised the venture round, we were like, all right, let's get the real deal. Like no one's trying to go to joinstreetfair.com.
How much did you pay for
it? 10 grand.
10 grand.
Just shy of 10 grand. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where I had to like wire a guy money in South America, and it was like I don't know if I'm just about to lose $19,000, but we did it after we raised venture as well and did the whole rebrand.
Yeah. So the story behind this is like Mike makes so much fun of me, but like on GoDaddy, it was like the seller, the owner of this domain has a minimum requirement of 10,000. And, that doesn't mean you're going to get it for 10,000. Like, that means like, if you try to submit a bid for 8,000, GoDaddy's like, we did not send this to the bidder. Like it's minimum. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to get this for less. And I set about like trying to find out who owned it. And it involved like, whois lookup, found a company, went on LinkedIn, found like someone affiliated with the company. And I was like, I can't reach out because my LinkedIn already said, actually, my LinkedIn might not have said StreetFair, but I was like VP of product at Passport, which had raised $100 million. I was like, I don't know, maybe they'll think I'm, able to pay for this. And like, I look like I might be trying to start a company or whatever else. So I had my mom like pretend, and my mom's a photographer. I had her pretend that she was trying to start like this photography website called StreetFair, for local artists. And I was having her like ping strangers on LinkedIn and saying, do you own this? And then we ended up like getting the lead of the name who owns it and like switched to Facebook. And she like Facebook messaged this guy who had been sitting on this domain since like 1996, like friended him on Facebook, sent him this message, and like it basically went down on Facebook chat. And then like, so this took months, and I was telling Mike, I'm like, Mike, I'm gonna get this thing for a steal. Like I'm going direct, and like, I'm pretty sure he's, it was $10,000 less the 5% GoDaddy fee. So we paid $9,500 for it. And Mike was like, dude, you should have just bought it. Like, anyway, it's a good story.
That's good.
That's the stuff you got to do. Yeah.
I used a broker, which I probably overpaid for it, using a broker that route.
But you didn't spend 2 months, having your mom like
we definitely
lie to strangers.
Yeah.
On the internet. Yeah. So I'd argue you came out ahead.
That's a good story. Tell us about your years in BC. And so I think it's always interesting talking to somebody who goes from BC to starting their own companies, because they're two very different skill sets. And usually you do the reverse. You start a company, usually have some kind of exit, and you've been advising for a while, and then you kind of start building the muscles to be a good venture capitalist after that. That's the path that most people take. So you did in reverse, right? So you were at Bain. What were the most valuable things that you got from what do you say, BVC is Bain Venture Capital Group or something like
BCV,
that.
Bain Capital
Yeah.
Ventures. Yeah.
Well, what was your role there? And then kind of what are the big things that you took away from that experience?
Yeah. So I definitely went in reverse order. You know, there's a reason there's a normal order. It's like, that's probably the way to do it. And there also are not many junior, positions at VC funds, more so with growth. And so this was a growth. So I got very fortunate to get connected to that team. And, I also props to Bain, like I wasn't an investment banker. I did not know how to read a P&L or make a P&L or any of that stuff. And what was cool about Bain, and I don't know how it's changed, but it's the same Bain as Bain Consulting. There's a big kind of consulting DNA there, but also like an operator DNA. And so I think there were only like 2 or 3 investment bankers out of 24 people on the investing team when I joined. And so I probably, had no business getting that role, but Bain was open to like kind of young, scrappy, people who wanted to learn on the job.
Well, to your point, Teddy, I have so many friends who went to get their MBA just to get like an intro to VC. So how do you even begin to get a seat at the table there?
So this is really random, but like when I started Easy Trades, I was living out of so it was literally as simple as like, we started Easy Trades. We're like, cool, we're going to spend the summer selling to colleges and universities. We found out that Boston has the most number of colleges per capita. So we're like, cool, we got to be headquartered in Boston. And I have an aunt and uncle who live in Boston. So I was like living, out of their basically basement. And my uncle knew one of the partners at Bain Ventures. And so I was a sophomore. I was a sophomore in college. And he just was able to get this guy to meet me for coffee. And it was not really a job interview because Bain didn't hire out of school, but he and I had an awesome conversation. Paul Zerlo, still very thankful for him. And, I just really kind of stayed in touch. And so I actually interviewed there when I was a senior, and they decided not to hire anyone out of school. And I kind of just stayed in touch with him. And then he reached out to me saying there were a couple positions in the New York office, and I applied. So, actually, I reached out to him, and he happened to say hey, there are a couple positions, by the way. So, I think he was thinking about me. But anyway, so yeah, very fortuitous. And there aren't a lot. So when I got the opportunity, I jumped on it. I was very naive about what that job would be like. Like I went there not to be a VC. I was like, cool, I'm going to get to talk to founders all day. I'm going to get to study businesses. I'm like, within 3 to 6 months, I'm going to be out of there because I'm going to have started a business. VC is a really bad place to go before you start a business because, as you said, Jake, it's a totally different side of your brain, which I did not appreciate. And I knew pretty quickly it was not a fit for me. I was like, yeah, I'm trying to be on the other side of the table, but I learned a ton. So I'm grateful for the experience. In all this back and forth, I lost your initial question. It's what were the things I learned there?
Yeah, basically, what did you get out of VC that basically helped you be successful at Passport and now start your own company?
Yeah, so definitely a lot. I'd say first is just the caliber of coworkers. I mean, the team there was so smart, or is so smart, and totally leveled up my thinking and my work product. And I think work product is a word I did not know or think about going into Bain. And as weird as it sounds, you just, particularly when you're starting out as an analyst, you have to be so incredibly concise when you're pitching to a partner, because your job as an analyst is go find companies and get a partner to meet with them. And there was kind of this unspoken, yeah, you've got to write a perfect email to get the partner to take the meeting. And I think some of that was a little cultural at Bain. There are a lot of ex-consultants and a lot of people that put a lot of weight, but it was so good for me to just learn how to organize my thoughts. And I was pre that, I would have written some super long and rambly email. So it's just great to how can you effectively communicate the things that really matter in as few sentences as possible. And to this day, the partner I worked for, Matt Harris, is in terms of impact per syllable spoken, is off the charts. Like he says nothing and says so much at the same time. And so I just learned a lot about, how to organize your thoughts, kind of frameworks. And then, you learn how this world works. So if you want to start a venture-backed company, there's definitely some shortcuts by having been on the venture side. And you're able to avoid very basic but common cap table mistakes from just like agreeing to bad terms or not knowing how it works or not speaking the language and all these weird and probably, not just probably weird and like, I wish they didn't exist, but the reality is like, it's still people on both sides and they do exist. Like, learning how to kind of speak the language, learning how to think like what a VC wants to hear when you're pitching, all of which made it so much easier to raise money.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So just from like the standpoint of you clearly learned a ton of VC. Passport sounds like you mentioned you connected to that because it was part of the Bain portfolio.
Yeah. And so it was actually, I sourced that investment when I was at Passport, when I was at Bain. It was a company I'd come across, and it ended up being like it took me 18 months to get Bob to like actually take Bain's money. And it was a long process that died like multiple times. And I was the only one like really like trying to keep it alive. And so I was just so passionate about the company. I had a great relationship at the end of all this with the founding team at Passport. And was ready to do something next, was ready to do something a little more operational or entrepreneurial, and was thinking about business school, and then found out that Passport was thinking about a London office. And I was like, I'm gonna throw my hat in that ring to move to London and see if I can help out. So that ended up working out.
And so you probably had a ton of deal flow, many companies that you either sourced or diligenced and vetted. So like what specifically about Passport, aside from obviously really cool job in London, what really like drew you away from Bain relative to all the other chances that kind of cross your desk?
Yeah. It's a good question. And I think this is the reason I wasn't a good VC is I love a hard problem, and Passport's a hard business. And like, if I were solving for like, hey, I'm trying to join a rocket ship and like make a bunch of money off my options. The other business that I worked on pretty closely and thought about joining was a company called Attentive. We did their Series A, and I think their last valuation was like 10 billion plus. And I was like, well, those options would have been pretty valuable. But Passport, like, which, but like, if you're trying to be a great VC, you should look for rocket ships. Like, don't look for cool businesses doing really hard things like that maybe don't have the same explosive growth curve. But I was just totally, I think as the entrepreneur side, I was like, this feels hard, but doable, and therefore like cool. And like, it's not obvious, but I think I could really sink my teeth into this and like help figure it out with this team that I had grown to like and respect. And to be clear, Passport was like a great business, like really solid foundation and everything like that. But I was just drawn to the challenge and to the team, just ended up being like an immediate kind of fit when I started talking to them about it.
It's exciting.
That's awesome. You're the second person now to have the same path, transferring out of VC into basically a portfolio company. Which I feel like is a hack because you're joining a good one if you start VC first.
I did have unfair inside information for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. And so Teddy, what's next for StreetFair?
Quite literally, we are making it work neighborhood by neighborhood, and just the way we broke this problem down. And I think, again, we're super early. We only started launching neighborhoods in March. We're in 12 neighborhoods, all in North Charlotte. But we're launching, we launched 3 neighborhoods this week. So the way we kind of broke that problem down is step 1, make it work. And we decided to pick 6 neighborhoods, something more than 1, less than 10. It was a little bit arbitrary. And we were really disciplined about we started launching these neighborhoods in March, and we're like, we're not going to launch any of this. I don't care how well these 6 are going. Let's be really hands-on. Let's talk to as many users as possible. I mean, we door knocked. We used to drive the neighborhoods and see which service providers were like actually doing the work, and like did all these things that don't scale. Great advice. Obviously, I can't take any credit, but like do things that don't scale early on. And so because it was 6 neighborhoods, we were able to run very cheap tests. Like if we wanted to test a mailer, it was like, cool, that's a $400 test, not a $40,000 test, because it was not some national ad campaign or $400,000 test. So we launched 6 neighborhoods, and our only goal was like, get it to work, iterate on the product. When we launched StreetFair in March, we didn't even have a service provider facing product. Like when someone requested a service, like we just got an email, and then we'd call the provider and say like, hey, you just got one, like go to this house and whatever else. And so really like staying really scrappy because it was a manageable volume. And then, we were really focused on kind of cohort penetration, like how are the neighborhoods performing? We could run all these tests, and it was working really well. And so then in July, we went to phase 2, which is not make it scale, but make it repeat. And there's a big difference between repeating something, or repeating success, and then scaling success. And repeating, like we're still doing things that don't scale, but we're coming from a foundation of like, cool, like we got it to work in 6 neighborhoods. On average, we had signed up a quarter of the households in each neighborhood, and we were getting, dozens and dozens of bookings a month. And like the providers were getting the jobs done, and they were happy, and we were driving route density and all these things we set out to prove, which were only possible because the sample size was 6, so we could really focus on it. And so we're like, all right, let's launch 1 a week, and let's see if we can repeat the success these 6 had, 12 more times this quarter. So that's the stage we're at right now. And then, if we're able to repeat in our next wave of cohorts, then great. Like, let's start to think about scaling to all of Charlotte and beyond.
Wow. Today, I feel like you give us so many nuggets on like how to literally take ideas and put it into practice. I think that like phase 1, 2, 3 is like a totally new framework that I haven't even heard of yet, but I really like it, especially since I focus a lot of my day on thinking about like platforms within, the health industry, but consumer obviously is like a common thread there. So when you're advising, I'm sure you have many conversations with like young folks, which is really the demographic of our listeners.
Yeah.
Like, how do you tell them to kind of what they should be focused on now, like developmentally, in terms of ideas? Like, what are the kind of tidbits and nuggets you impart to them?
Number 1 is like start something, and it's what I look for in everyone I've ever hired. By the way, starting something could be like starting a club in college or organizing like a neighborhood pickleball tournament. Like it doesn't have to be a scalable business. But you learn a lot by like going from 0 to 1 on anything. And I think that's just a great set of skills. And so I really don't care what it is, but like start something. It also shows like a passion and a stick to itness and whatever else. And so much of like what we do on a day-to-day basis is like not in a textbook or not in whatever. So start something. And then, I think this is a fairly recent skill, but something that we really lean into, just as you talked about, like break down the problems. Like, everyone's first thought is like, okay, cool, I need to have this app built and then people will come or whatever else. And like, you got to completely flip it and like get someone to do the thing that your app will ultimately do without an app. Like if you can't convince them to like do it and do all the work for them, like text the whoever and show up and pick it up, like all the best companies, like when Postmates was starting, like the restaurants weren't involved. They just got someone to book and they sent an employee to go pick up the sandwich and like drop it off. And it's like, cool. They just de-risked part of that supply chain. Like they got someone to place an order on an app. And so, if you are working on a problem, just like, what's the easiest thing you could learn that is going to need to be true for the bigger picture to work? And I think that applies, whether you're starting a company or not, that applies to most people's day jobs. But just break problems down. Build it and they will come is wrong.
Make it happen and then build.
Exactly. Like make it happen. And then like, technology is never it is like, even StreetFair, the product itself isn't like the reason StreetFair is working. Now, some products are probably like, yeah, like the product is the whole thing. But I think a much healthier approach, even when you're starting a technology company, is like, what behavior pattern you're trying to drive, and can technology help that behavior pattern? And you should approach it from that lens, as opposed to, I have an idea for an app.
Yeah. Consumer first, then tech. So not tech
Exactly.
first, then consumer.
Yeah.
I mean, Teddy, this has been so insightful for us. So we're really grateful to have you on. So, one of the early episodes here for our Bell Curve podcast.
Super excited and glad we got connected. And if we don't totally StreetFair, hopefully I can come back, at some point in the future and tell you whatever phase we're on then. And
Love it. Will it be phase 4? Is there a phase after phase 3?
Probably, if we survive that long.
World
I
domination.
I try not to think too far in the future, because if you don't hit the next phase, like the next part doesn't matter. And if you allow yourself to focus on one problem at a time, you can actually get done.
I love it. Teddy, this is great. Thanks so much for
Cool.
joining, and excited to publish this for our listeners.
Sweet. Awesome, guys. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us this week on The Bell Curve. If you loved this episode, go ahead, give us a follow, and rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. It would mean the world to Tom and I. We come up with new episodes every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until next week.